My wife had the accident 3 months ago. I'm alone in the house now, and the scratches are getting louder. I'm a writer, and 5 years ago, my wife Jessica and I moved to an old brick home in the country. We wanted to get away from the distractions of the city. I never told her, but I was struggling financially as well, more than she thought, and I couldn't keep the career that I had chosen if we didn't make the move. She was always supportive. I loved her. About 2 months ago, I heard it for the first time. I was sleeping in bed on the second story of my home when I heard a faint noise in the distance. At first, I thought that I was imagining it, or dreaming. But then the noises became more pronounced. My eyes opened wearily and I stared up at the ceiling fan as I began to discern the sounds in the distance. It was almost as if someone was slowly scratching a sharp object up and down against a rock. Something metallic, or maybe some type of animal. I listened as the sound continued. That first night, the slow sound of scratching would last for a few seconds, and then stop for a minute or so before picking back up again. After a few minutes, it finally stopped completely. I was still somewhat anxious, but a shot of whiskey took care of that for the most part. The second night, it happened again. In fact, every night for 2 months now, I can hear the noise coming from the trees on my property. I've spent hours on end searching online for different noises of animals, figuring it could be some type of rodent chewing on a pipe. I even recorded the noises, but nothing seems to match it. There's something else too. The scratching is getting faster and more vigorous. The first week, it would last for a few seconds, and then there would be a minute or two of silence. Now when I listen, the sounds are much more rapid and continue on for nearly an hour. And then in a moment, they stop. Just like that. Last night, I had finally had enough. Lying in bed, I quickly stood up, grabbing my shotgun from the corner. I took a swig of Jack, and I headed out towards the woods and the scratching. Maybe I shouldn't have. The moon hung over the green hills surrounding the forest, but as I took my first step into the tall pines, the safety of its light disappeared completely. Luckily, I had already taped a flashlight on top of the barrel a few nights back. Somehow I knew that the noise wasn't going to stop, and tonight I finally had enough courage to do something about it. Following the gravel path my wife had helped me make years earlier, I listened closely. Each step seemed to further intensify the sounds, and I would be lying if I told you I didn't think about turning back. But I kept following, and I was getting closer, until finally the noise was only a few feet away. The scratching was almost deafening now. Each small step forward seemed to send whatever it was into almost a frenzy. Picking up a large stone that had been set on a thick sheet of plywood, I pushed the plywood aside, took a deep breath, and I pointed the beam of the flashlight down into the darkness of the old well at the edge of the woods. The scratching stopped. I peered down further into the blackness, and I saw that the well was almost completely dry at the bottom. It hadn't rained in weeks. The depth made it nearly impossible to see, but there was something down there. As my eyes adjusted, I saw the faint outline of 2 yellow eyes staring back up at me. As I looked down into them, I realized that something was very wrong, and an unmistakable feeling of dread came over me. Rushing to close back up the top of the well, I suddenly realized what the sound had been this whole time. I watched as the creature rapidly tried to claw its way up the side towards me. The scratching had been its attempt to get out. Before I could close it, the thing clawed its way halfway up the side before falling back down into the darkness. Standing silently over the well, I observed the creature down below. Its yellow eyes never left mine, and I watched it claw its way rapidly up the side of the stone in a desperate attempt to reach me. I came to my senses and I put the heavy plywood back on top, covering the top of the well completely. This time I weighted down with as many stones as I could find. What the hell was this thing? And what the hell was I supposed to do now? I listened as the scratching slowed to the pace it had been before. Maybe the creature's frantic attempts at freedom or attacking me had taken a toll on its energy. Before I could think further, I felt a piercing pain in my left ankle. I yelled out in agony and I fell backwards onto the thick bushes that surrounded the well. I couldn't see what had bitten me in the late night, and I suddenly realized that I had dropped the shotgun and flashlight in a moment of surprise. Putting pressure on the leg wound with one hand, I used the other to grasp onto anything I could in an attempt to get myself back to my feet. As I finally managed to stand, I felt the same pain as I had moments ago, but this time it was worse. I let out a scream as my hands used all of their strength to try and pull the small creature off of my leg, but its fangs dug in deep. It was too dark to see what it was, but as I grabbed its flesh tightly, I quickly thought that it seemed to be the size of a large house cat, just much stronger. Clawing at its eyes only seemed to agitate it further, and the thing sank its teeth deeper into the flesh of my leg. I could feel blood pouring down past my ankle and pulling at my shoe. Then I remembered that I had brought a spare knife in my back pocket. Letting go of the creatures with one hand, I unsheathed the old fisherman's blade and I dug it deep into the creature's skull. There was a chilling scream unlike anything that I had ever heard before, and it fell onto the ground in front of me. I couldn't help but stare as it curled itself up in defeat, and it let out one last soft shriek of pain. I desperately crawled towards the flashlight and gun, only a few yards away now. I knew that there might be more of those things, whatever the hell they were, and it might be the only chance I had to make it back to the house alive. Trying to remain as calm as possible, I felt the cool grip of the weapon back in my hand and I carefully used it as a cane to help me stand. Blood now poured from my leg, and standing up hastily nearly caused me to faint. And then I heard rustling in the woods around me, all around me. Maybe it was the loss of blood, but as I pointed my firearm back into the thick trees, I swore that I saw hundreds of yellow eyes staring back at me. I fired a round into the center of them, and then I limped back towards the path as fast as I could. Nearly falling again, I made my way towards the gravel path that Jessica had helped make years earlier. With each clumsy step forward, I awaited another piercing bite to my body, but it never came. After a few minutes, I felt the soft padding of the gravel below my feet, and I could see the back door and neighboring lamp in sight. Picking up speed now, I ignored the now shooting pain going through my leg and I ran as fast as I could. I felt the doorknob in my hand. Thank God. I had left it unlocked. Closing it behind me with a slam, I locked the deadbolt and I leaned up against it for a moment. No, I couldn't rest now. Limping over to the kitchen table, I picked up my cell phone and partially drenched it with warm blood. I had forgotten that I was bleeding. Hopefully it would still work. 911, what seems to be your emergency? I need help. I've been bitten by something and I'm losing a lot of blood. Okay, we're going to send help now. Can you put pressure on the wound? Yes, but... The phone went dead. I tried it again, but it was covered in blood now and I wasn't sure if I could get it working. Thinking about my options, I began to hear the same scratching that I had heard for months. It was slow, almost purposeful, and this time, instead of coming from far off in the woods, it was against my back door. I instinctively put the cell phone in my pocket, grabbed the shotgun tight, and headed back upstairs. In my current condition, I had no chance of escaping on foot, and if I didn't stop the bleeding soon, I wouldn't even survive until the medics arrived, if in fact they were coming at all. Closing the thick wooden bedroom door behind me, I used what was left of my strength to push Jessica's dresser up against it. My mind was racing, and the last thing I managed to do was tie one of my wife's old belts tightly above the wound in a hurried attempt to stop the bleeding. The pain was excruciating, but I pulled it as tight as I could in my weakened state. That was all that my body could take. I collapsed to the floor. When I awoke, I wasn't sure how much time had passed. Still alone, it did appear that the makeshift tourniquet had worked correctly and stopped the bleeding. Some of the pain was gone, I had noticed as well. But when I tried to wiggle my toes, I couldn't. In fact, there wasn't any feeling at all below the mark on my leg, and my foot had begun to turn a shade of deep blue. Unable to get to my feet, I somehow pulled myself up onto the bed and I checked the phone again. It still wasn't working, and now it wouldn't even turn on. Wondering how much time had passed, I glanced at an old alarm clock and saw that it had been nearly an hour since the incident. Why the hell haven't the medics arrived yet? And there's something else. I can hear the scratching again, but this time it's faster than it was before. And it's coming from right outside of my bedroom door. Before I begin, I'm a 16-year-old male. About 3 years ago, I was in Virginia visiting my family over the summer. We were right outside of the DC area and staying in a 2-story house near the freeway. On the other side of the freeway was a forest. So my mom, her boyfriend Eric, and I were all staying with Eric's parents. We had brought some night vision binoculars and decided that tonight was the perfect time to use them. So after dinner, we gear up and we head out. We pass under the freeway and head into the woods. When we get about 5 minutes into the forest, we set down our bag and take out our binoculars. My mom looks around with them for a while, seeing a few squirrels here and there. She gets tired of them and she passes them to me. I look around for a while, and being careful not to look at the freeway for fear of being blinded. I spot something behind a tree about 50 feet to our left. I concentrate on it, trying to figure out what it is. It looks like a pale, bald, anorexic man looking straight at us from behind the tree. I get a bit uneasy, but I'm hesitant to believe that it's really there. I ask Eric to take a look, just in case. To my despair, he sees it too, and he describes it much in the same way that I did. Now, Eric is a former amateur boxer and I train MMA almost every day, but neither one of us wants to stick around with that thing. We start heading back to the house, crossing under the freeway. We take another look behind us as a car comes by. All three of us see glowing eyes lit up by the headlights on the other side of the freeway. We say screw that and we head back to the house. When we get back, Eric's parents are asleep, and my mom and Eric go upstairs to the guest room. There's only one guest room in the house, so I have the couch downstairs. I'm a little too excited after seeing the thing in the woods, so I end up staying up all night. Around 3 a.m., I'm watching TV and I start hearing footsteps above me. I immediately remember our earlier encounter and I panic a little. I try to calm down and tell myself that it's just one of the dogs or maybe somebody who couldn't sleep. I keep hearing the footsteps for a while, until I hear a doorknob jiggle. I find it weird that they're trying to open a locked door, but I try to ignore it. They stop, walk around for a few more minutes, and then it's quiet again. I stay up until the sun starts coming up, and then I pass out. My mom wakes me up, and I remember the footsteps from the night before. I describe what happened, and I ask if one of them got up at any time. She says no, and I think that it must have been one of the dogs. That is until she tells me the room above me is the office. No one is in the office and the door stays locked at night. My heart sinks as I piece it all together. I don't know if it was that thing for sure, but I think it was. I've done a lot of research since then, trying to figure out what that thing was at night. I found two creatures that seemed to match it. I think it was either a skinwalker or a wendigo. Whichever one it was, I'm just thankful that the door was locked. I know I wouldn't be able to fight that thing no matter how tough I am.